Hi, I'm Jerry Skripczak. I am what we call a history buff, and one of my fondest studies has been the history of Erie's waterfront. I'm president of the largest fishing club in Pennsylvania, and of course fishing and waterfront is all related, and it's something that we've been interested in and studied and promote. And I hope by taking this walking tour that you can have a feeling of what was and what it means to us today. Right now where we're standing at the corner of Front and Sassafras Street is kind of where it all began. Within 5 blocks of here, the French settled in their first fort about 1760. They built a fort right on the waterfront at the foot of Sobieski Street. And they had a village, they had a mill, and had about 100 families moved in. Well, then the French and Indian War came up, and they got out, and the British moved in the same spot. They built another fort. And then after the Revolutionary War, the Americans took over, and the first settlers came into Erie again at the mouth of Mill Creek, which is about 5 blocks east of here, and settled. The first settlers came in. It was the Reed family that moved in here. And from that time on, Erie became a bustling little town. And the main reason is because of our Presque Isle Peninsula. If you look at all the development that happened along the Great Lakes and see how it evolved, almost all of the settlements were made at the mouths of navigable waterways and rivers. Of course, Erie doesn't have any, but Presque Isle Peninsula gave us a natural harbor and made it a natural for people to come and settle here. So they could, and if it wasn't for that peninsula, I don't think we'd have been here at the time we did. And then what transpired, if you can imagine looking back in the early 1800s, seeing 50, 60, 70 tall ships right out here in the harbor where you are. And that was the only means of transportation across the Great Lakes, was of course by ship. There were no railroads back in the early 1700s and the 1800s. And as the settlement grew, the shipping grew. And then we had some very, very strong entrepreneurs, the Reed family primarily. They built the first dock. And we're standing right on a bluff, right above that dock. It was called Reed's Wharf. And today it's called the Sassafras Dock, and that's where the Erie Convention Center is. Well, that's where he had a large shipping company. And this is where they came into the harbor and discharged their passengers and their goods. What was realized after a while was when New York State decided to build a canal all the way from the Hudson River to Buffalo, New York, it started a lot of competition amongst the states for trade. And they decided they needed a canal that ran from Erie to Pittsburgh. So they built the Erie Extension Canal. It was completed in 1844, and it came diagonally across the city of Erie at 8th and Chestnut. It was their headquarters, and the canal proceeded the use of locks to lower boats from here down to Reed's Wharf, or at that time they built what was called the public dock. And that was in order, it was also called the canal basins. And that was where the canal emptied into Lake Erie. And that's where the canal boats would be brought down, use of locks, lowering down to the lower level. And this is pretty much a big area for all the transportation hub at that time, was all through here. If you go a little further west from here, you'll see one of the first steam-driven water plants in the United States. It was the Erie Water Works. And if you keep going, it's the next buildings on the left. Right below us now is an area that was originally a paper mill for Watson Paper Company. But prior to that, there were some smelting plants, and they used to mine iron ore at the head of Presque Isle Bay. And it was called bog iron. And they would mine the iron out of the area, or they'd bring it over to the smelting plant and make iron goods. So in order to store the water, they put a 120-foot tall standpipe, which is similar to a water tank. And they would pump the water up to the top of the tank, and of course it would flow by gravity to the rest of the city. Later on, it developed and ended up with the different filtration systems and things like that. At the same time, the Pennsylvania Fish Commission was formed, and because commercial fishing was such a big deal in Erie, Pennsylvania, in fact, it was once called the freshwater fishing capital of the world. Was right here in Erie. there were at least 100 and some fishing boats that ran out of this harbor every day during the season to try to catch fish. There were cases every many years where 20 and 30 million pounds of fish were taken in through our harbor and distributed throughout the country via shipping or through the railroads after they arrived. The first fish hatchery was located a block south of here by the Fish Commission. It was at 2nd and Sassafras, and that was Erie's first fish hatchery, established in the late 1860s. I think it was 1868. And then this hatchery got to be too small, so they opened another hatchery, which was located right down the bluff on where the waterworks property is today. And that was the second fish hatchery. And the fish hatchery was designed to keep the commercial fishing industry going by stocking more fish into the lake. And that last hatchery operated until about 1960, and it was closed. So then the Sons of Lake Erie, which is a fishing club that I represent, built a hatchery back in 1985 that's still in operation today. So we stock fish, walleye, and perch, and brown trout into the lake. But if you keep proceeding westward, you'll pass an area which was at one time a large boathouse community, where the Pennsylvania Railroad owned the land all along the waterfront, and they leased this land to people who could build a boathouse. And then you go a little further down, you'll find what we call the Cascade Docks. Those were railroad docks that were built by the Erie and Pittsburgh Railroad, and their purpose was to ship, of course, goods from Erie to Pittsburgh. And they hauled in iron ore, they brought in iron ore and shipped out coal through those docks. And they stayed pretty much in operation until the early 1920s, when they were closed down. What happened was there was another set of docks that were built 3 blocks west of here at the Holland Street Piers. And they were built originally back in the 1800s, 60s by the Philadelphia and Erie Railroad. Eventually, the Philadelphia and Erie Railroad and the Erie and Pittsburgh Railroad were absorbed by the Pennsylvania Railroad, and they owned most of our waterfront for many years. With them owning most of the waterfront, not much more development happened beyond the coal and iron ore docks, and it was kind of that way until just recently. The Cascade Docks, as we call them, started off as coal and iron ore docks, and so they operated until about the early 1920s. And then they were closed right after the First World War. And they became set up for other uses. During the Second World War, a company called Erie Concrete and Steel, which is today's Perry Shipbuilding Company, built ships for the Second World War. They built 33 United States Navy vessels. These same docks areas were used by Perry to build his flagship and his 2 frigates that were built right at the mouth of Cascade Creek, which is located right near those docks. Perry also built, where I'm standing right now, right below here, was the end of Lee's Run, which became part of the Erie Canal extension. And Lee's Run is where he built his gunboats. The Porcupine, I can't think of all the names right now, but they built his gunboats right below where we're standing today. So this whole area from here to the Cascade Docks is loaded with history. There was an ice plant at the corner of Walnut and Front Street, and what they did is they had a conveyor, and in the wintertime, the company would cut ice out of the bay, blocks of ice, because there were no refrigerators, and they used ice boxes. They'd cut these blocks of ice, carry them up by conveyor to the top of the hill, and store them. And back then, you didn't have a refrigerator, so they would bring ice to your house. The Iceman Cummins would bring ice to your house. And you had a little sign you put in the window, and it's by the way the sign was placed, you could tell how many pound blocks of ice you want. And this is one of the companies that provided that. The water plant initially started taking water from Presque Isle Bay, but at the same time we were discharging our sewage east of here in the eastern part of the bay. Well, and the winds were right, people were drinking the bad water, and we had a lot of diseases came up. So the water authority, or the water, at that time it was called the waterworks, ran a pipe out into Lake Erie where they take the water directly out of the lake. And this was their first plant. The first Erie Yacht Club was located right alongside the water plant. They operated there for many years until the late 1920s. They moved to their present location way on the west side. But there's a lot of history here. You can't really see much of it anymore. The development has kind of blotted it all out. But if you can close your mind and think about it, you'll see that this is a very historical neighborhood. It's the foundation of it. A lot of the commercial fishermen that operated in Erie lived in this neighborhood. I can think of about 10 of them right offhand that I know personally that were grown up and lived and raised their families right near the water. Taking this tour, I think you can get an appreciation of what we used to be, and if you have an understanding, you can kind of see little pieces and remnants of things. There's a few historical markers along this path that'll tell you in more detail of some of the things I mentioned.